My landlord entered my apartment without notice and I caught him on my Nest camera going through my personal belongings. I'm 27F and I'm writing this from my best friend's couch because I don't feel safe going back to my apartment right now. What started as a routine camera notification has turned into a legal nightmare that's affecting every part of my life. My name doesn't matter, but my landlord's name is Gary Brennan and I need to document what's been happening because this has escalated way beyond a simple privacy violation. I moved into my one-bedroom apartment in North Dallas 8 months ago. It's a small complex with 12 units, all owned and managed by Gary. He lives in one of the ground floor units and handles everything himself. No property management company, no maintenance staff, just him. When I toured the place, Gary seemed normal, a little chatty but not creepy. He's maybe in his late 50s, divorced. He told me he'd owned the building for 15 years. The rent was reasonable for the area, $900 a month plus utilities. The apartment was clean and updated. I signed a 1-year lease. For the first few months everything was fine. Gary was responsive when I had maintenance requests. He fixed my garbage disposal within a day. He replaced the air filter when I asked. But about 4 months ago I started noticing small things that felt off. I'd come home from work and items in my apartment would be slightly moved. A stack of mail I'd left on the kitchen counter would be in a different position. A drawer I was sure I'd closed would be partially open. At first I thought I was being paranoid or just forgetting how I'd left things. Then one day I came home and my bedroom closet door was open. I never leave it open because it bothers me visually. I'm particular about that. Inside the closet some of my shoe boxes had been moved around. I texted Gary and asked if he'd entered my apartment for any reason. He said no, that he hadn't been in my unit since I moved in. I let it go, but I felt uneasy. 2 weeks later I came home and found a coffee mug in my sink that I definitely hadn't used that morning. It had coffee residue in it and I don't drink coffee, I only drink tea. That's when I decided to install a security camera. I bought a Nest camera and set it up in my living room facing the front door and the hallway that leads to my bedroom and bathroom. I didn't tell Gary about it. I figured it was my apartment and I had a right to monitor my own space. The camera has motion detection and sends alerts to my phone whenever it picks up movement. For the first week nothing unusual happened. The camera only caught me coming and going. Then 2.5 weeks ago I was at work and got a motion alert at 11:30 in the morning. I opened the app and watched live as Gary unlocked my front door and walked into my apartment. My heart started racing. I watched as he looked around the living room, then he walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. The camera angle couldn't see into the bedroom but I could see him disappear down the hall. He was in my apartment for 23 minutes. When he came back into view he was carrying something. I couldn't tell what it was. He left through the front door and locked it behind him. I sat at my desk shaking. I didn't know what to do. I texted Gary immediately and asked if he'd been in my apartment. He responded saying no, that he hadn't needed to enter for any maintenance. He lied directly to my face. I went home during my lunch break and checked my apartment. Everything looked normal but I went through my bedroom carefully. My underwear drawer had been disturbed. Items were in a different order than how I organized them. A photo album I keep on my bookshelf had been moved. I felt sick. I downloaded the camera footage and saved it to my cloud storage. That evening I called a lawyer. I found a tenant rights attorney named Monica Chen. I explained what happened and sent her the video. She watched it and said what Gary did was illegal, that in Texas landlords are required to give at least 24 hours notice before entering a rental unit except in emergencies. She said going through my personal belongings was an even more serious violation, that it could constitute invasion of privacy or even criminal trespass. She advised me to send Gary a formal written notice citing the lease violation and demanding that he not enter my apartment again without proper notice. I sent the letter via certified mail the next day. Gary signed for it. 2 days later he showed up at my door. He was angry. He said I had no right to install a camera without his permission, that it was a violation of my lease. I told him there was nothing in the lease prohibiting security cameras. He said he owned the building and he had a right to enter units to check for damage or maintenance issues. I told him not without notice, that he'd violated Texas property code. He got more agitated. He said if I had a problem with how he managed his property I should move out. I said I had 7 months left on my lease and I wasn't going anywhere. He left but I could tell he was furious. The next week was quiet, no motion alerts, no signs that Gary had entered. Then last week I got an alert at 2 in the afternoon. I opened the app and saw Gary in my apartment again. This time he walked directly to where the Nest camera was mounted on my bookshelf and he unplugged it. The feed went black. I left work immediately and drove home. When I got there Gary was gone. The camera had been moved to my kitchen counter. It was still unplugged. I checked the footage before he unplugged it. He'd spent 15 minutes in my apartment before disabling the camera. I called Monica immediately. She said we needed to escalate, that this was now a pattern of behavior. She drafted a demand letter threatening legal action if Gary entered my apartment again. We sent it certified mail. She also suggested I file a police report. I went to the Dallas Police Department and filed a report for criminal trespass. I brought the video footage on a thumb drive. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but said these cases are difficult because landlords often claim they had legitimate reasons to enter. He said he'd document everything and that I could request charges be filed, but that the DA's office would decide whether to prosecute. I also filed a complaint with the Texas Real Estate Commission since Gary is essentially acting as a property manager. 2 days after I filed a police report, Gary texted me saying he needed to enter my apartment to inspect the HVAC system. He gave exactly 24 hours notice. I told him I'd be present during the inspection. He showed up the next day with a HVAC technician. I watched them the entire time. They spent 10 minutes looking at the air handler in my closet and then they left. The technician told me everything was functioning fine, that there were no issues. It was clearly a pretense to get into my apartment legally. After they left, I noticed that Gary had been looking around my living room while the technician worked. His eyes were scanning my bookshelf, my desk, like he was searching for something. That night I installed a second camera in my bedroom, hidden in a decorative box on my dresser. I know some states have laws about recording in private spaces, but Texas is a one-party consent state and it's my own bedroom. I figured I had a right to monitor it. 3 days ago I got a motion alert at midnight. I was asleep. The alert woke me up. I opened the app and saw my bedroom camera feed. Gary was in my bedroom. He was going through my dresser drawers. I almost screamed. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I told the dispatcher that my landlord had illegally entered my apartment and was currently in my bedroom, that I had video proof. She said officers were on the way. I could hear Gary moving around in the other room. I was terrified he'd come into my bedroom where I was hiding under my covers. Within 6 minutes I heard pounding on my front door and police announcing themselves. I heard Gary say something, then footsteps, then voices. I got out of bed and went to the living room. 2 officers were there with Gary. Gary was claiming he'd received a call from me about a water leak and had entered to check on it. I told the officers that was a lie, that I'd never called him, that he'd entered without permission and I had video evidence. I showed them the footage on my phone, both the live feed from 3 minutes ago showing Gary in my bedroom, and the saved footage from the previous entries. The officers looked at each other. One of them asked Gary why he was in my bedroom at midnight. Gary said he'd been checking for water damage from a leak in the unit above mine. I told the officers there is no unit above mine. I'm on the top floor. Gary's face went red. He started saying I was harassing him, that I was a problem tenant, that he had a right to protect his property. The officer separated us. They took my statement in my apartment while another officer talked to Gary in the hallway. They took copies of the video footage. They gave me a case number. One officer told me I should consider filing for a protective order, that Gary's behavior was escalating and concerning. They told Gary he needed to leave the property immediately and that he was not to contact me or enter my apartment again. After they left, I packed a bag and went to my friend Jasmine's place. I've been here for 3 days. I'm terrified to go back to my apartment, knowing Gary has keys and has been coming in whenever he wants. Monica filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order yesterday. We have a hearing scheduled for next week. She's also helping me file a lawsuit against Gary for violations of the Texas Property Code, invasion of privacy, and emotional distress. She said based on the evidence we have a strong case, that I could potentially recover damages, attorney's fees, and be released from my lease without penalty. But right now I just want to feel safe. I've been looking at new apartments but most places require proof of income and references. I'm worried Gary will sabotage any rental applications if new landlords contact him. My job performance is suffering because I'm anxious and not sleeping well. Jasmine has been amazing. She's letting me stay as long as I need, but I can't live on her couch forever. I also keep thinking about what Gary was looking for in my apartment, why he kept coming back, what he was doing in my bedroom. The police said they're investigating but that it could take weeks or months. Monica said the TRO hearing should result in an order prohibiting Gary from coming within a certain distance of me and from entering my apartment. But enforcement of those orders is inconsistent, and I'm scared of what Gary might do. He knows where I work. He has my personal information from my lease application. He has keys to my apartment. I feel completely violated and vulnerable. I never thought renting an apartment could turn into this nightmare. Update, 3 weeks later. I'm updating because the situation has developed in ways I didn't expect and I need to document everything for the ongoing legal case. The temporary restraining order hearing happened 9 days after my original post. Monica and I appeared before a judge and presented the video evidence along with a timeline of Gary's illegal entries. Gary showed up with a lawyer, some guy who looked barely out of law school. His lawyer argued that Gary had legitimate property management reasons for entering my apartment, that the lease gave him broad rights to inspect the premises. Monica destroyed that argument. She pointed out that the lease specifically requires 24-hour written notice except in emergencies, and that none of Gary's entries qualified as emergencies. She also played the video of Gary going through my underwear drawer and asked the judge what legitimate property management purpose that served. Gary's lawyer had no response. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. Gary is prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me, from entering my apartment, and from contacting me directly. The order is in effect for 2 years pending the outcome of the civil lawsuit. The judge also ordered Gary to provide me with alternative access to the apartment that doesn't require him to be present, which meant changing the locks and giving only me the new keys. Gary was furious. I could see him clenching his jaw as the judge read the order. After the hearing, Monica told me that we had a really strong case for the civil suit, that she was confident we'd win damages. But she also warned me that Gary might try to retaliate in ways that don't violate the restraining order. She was right. 2 days after the hearing, I went back to my apartment for the first time since the police incident. Monica had arranged for a locksmith to meet me there and change all the locks. Gary wasn't allowed to be present per the court order. When I walked in, everything looked normal at first, but then I noticed things were missing. My laptop was gone from my desk. A gold necklace my grandmother gave me was missing from my jewelry box. About $80 in cash I'd kept in a drawer was gone. I immediately called the police and filed a report for burglary. The responding officer documented everything. He noted that there was no sign of forced entry, which made sense because Gary had keys until the locks were changed. I also had video footage from my Nest camera up until the point Gary unplugged it during his last legal entry, but nothing from after the police incident because I hadn't been staying there. The officer said the timing suggested Gary had taken the items sometime between the police incident and the restraining order hearing. Monica said this was witness intimidation and theft, that we could add it to the civil lawsuit and that it strengthened our case. But my laptop had all my work files on it, photos, personal documents. I'm sick about losing it. The locksmith changed all the locks and installed a deadbolt that only I have keys to. I also installed 2 additional cameras, one covering my bedroom and one covering my kitchen, so now I have 3 cameras total with cloud backup. I moved back into the apartment 4 days ago. I didn't want to, but I can't stay with Jasmine forever and I can't afford to pay rent on my apartment and rent somewhere else. Monica is working on getting me released from my lease as part of the settlement, but that could take months. Since I've been back, I've been constantly anxious. Every noise makes me jump. I check the camera feeds obsessively. I also found out something disturbing from another tenant in the building. Her name is Nicole. She lives 2 units down from me. She stopped me in the parking lot 3 days ago and asked if I was the one who got the restraining order against Gary. I said yes. She said she was glad someone finally did something. She told me that Gary had entered her apartment multiple times without notice over the 2 years she'd lived there, that she'd confronted him about it and he'd threatened to evict her if she made a complaint. She said she'd also noticed items missing from her apartment, small things like costume jewelry and cash, but she could never prove it was Gary. Another tenant, a guy named Marcus from the ground floor, overheard us talking and joined the conversation. He said Gary had entered his apartment without notice at least 5 times that he knew of, that one time he'd come home early and caught Gary in his living room. Gary had claimed he was checking the smoke detectors, but Marcus said all the smoke detectors were functioning fine. I asked why neither of them had reported this. Nicole said she couldn't afford to move and was afraid of retaliation. Marcus said he just wanted to avoid conflict. I told them both about my lawsuit and suggested they might want to speak with Monica about joining as co-plaintiffs. Nicole said she'd think about it. Marcus said he was moving out next month anyway and didn't want to get involved. This conversation made me realize that Gary has probably been doing this for years to multiple tenants, that I'm not an isolated case. Monica said if we can find other victims, it significantly strengthens the case and could even result in criminal charges. I've been leaving notes on doors in the building asking anyone who's experienced unauthorized entries to contact me. So far 3 other people have reached out, all with similar stories. One woman said Gary entered her apartment while she was in the shower, that she heard someone in her living room and came out in a towel to find him going through her mail. This is so much bigger than I initially thought. Meanwhile, the police investigation into the theft of my laptop is ongoing. They interviewed Gary and he denied taking anything. He claimed I must have misplaced the items or that someone else had access to my apartment. The detective assigned to the case said without direct evidence like video of Gary taking the items it's hard to prove, but that he's building a circumstantial case based on access and opportunity. Monica also discovered something through her investigation. She ran a background check on Gary and found that he'd been sued twice before by former tenants. One case was settled out of court, the other was dismissed on a technicality. Both cases involved allegations of unauthorized entry and invasion of privacy. She's trying to get the case files to see if there's a pattern we can use. I also finally told my parents what's been going on. I'd been avoiding it because I didn't want them to worry. My dad was furious. He wanted to drive up from Houston and confront Gary himself. I told him that would violate the restraining order and make things worse. My mom has been calling me every day to check in. She wants me to move back home, but I have a job here and a life here. Work has been understanding about everything. My boss knows what's happening and has been flexible about my schedule for court dates and meetings with Monica. But I can tell my coworkers are starting to wonder why I'm so distracted and stressed. The civil lawsuit is moving forward. We have a mediation scheduled for next month to see if Gary will settle. Monica said most landlords in his position settle to avoid the publicity and potential criminal charges. She's asking for $20,000 in damages, release from my lease, return of my security deposit, and attorney's fees. She said we'll probably settle for less but that the opening demand needs to be high. I don't even care about the money, I just want this to be over. I want to feel safe in my own home again. Last night I woke up at 3 in the morning convinced I heard someone at my door. I checked all 3 camera feeds, there was no one there. But I couldn't fall back asleep, I just lay there staring at my phone watching the live feeds. This is not sustainable, I know that. My therapist, I started seeing someone 2 weeks ago, says I'm experiencing symptoms of PTSD, that the violation of my personal space has created a trauma response. She's helping me work through it but progress is slow. I've also started documenting everything obsessively, every interaction with other tenants, every camera alert, every conversation with Monica or the police. I have a binder now with printed copies of all the evidence organized by date. Monica says I'm the most prepared client she's ever had. I don't know if that's a compliment or just sad. Final update, 2.5 months later. This will be my final update because the case is resolved and I'm finally moving forward with my life. The mediation happened 5 weeks after my last update. Gary showed up with his lawyer and Monica and I presented our evidence. We had the video footage, witness statements from 4 other tenants, the police reports, the restraining order, and Monica's research showing Gary's history of similar behavior. The mediator, a retired judge named William Kaufman, reviewed everything and then met separately with each side. When he met with us he said our case was extremely strong, that if it went to trial we'd almost certainly win and Gary would likely face criminal charges. He said the video of Gary going through my underwear drawer alone was damning enough to result in significant damages. When he met with Gary's side we waited for 2 hours. Finally the mediator came back and said Gary was willing to settle. The terms were better than I expected. Gary agreed to pay me $18,000 in damages, to release me immediately from my lease with no penalty, to return my full security deposit, and to pay all of Monica's attorney fees which totaled another $12,000. He also agreed to a stipulation that would be filed with the court admitting that he had violated Texas property code and my privacy rights. In exchange I agreed not to pursue criminal charges and to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the specific terms of the settlement. Monica advised me to take it. She said $18,000 was a significant amount and that getting out of the lease immediately was valuable. She also said the stipulation filed with the court would be public record, so even with the NDA there would be documentation of what Gary did. I agreed to the settlement. We signed the papers that day. Gary wouldn't look at me during the signing, he just stared at the table. His lawyer did all the talking. The money was transferred to Monica's trust account within 3 days. She took her fees and expenses and I received a check for $18,200. The extra $200 was the security deposit. I gave notice at my apartment immediately. I had 30 days to move out per the settlement agreement. I'd already been looking at new places. I found a 1-bedroom in a professionally managed complex in Richardson. It's more expensive, $1,100 a month, but it has controlled access, security cameras in common areas, and a management company with actual policies. I moved 2 weeks ago. Jasmine and some friends from work helped me pack and transport everything. Walking out of that apartment for the last time felt incredible, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I haven't seen or heard from Gary since the mediation. The restraining order is still in effect for another 1.5 years. The police investigation into the theft of my laptop is still technically open, but the detective told me that without Gary confessing or new evidence appearing it's unlikely to result in charges. I've accepted that I'm probably never getting my laptop or my grandmother's necklace back. The other tenants I'd connected with at the old building have also started taking action. Nicole decided to move out and consulted with Monica about her own potential lawsuit. 2 others filed complaints with the Texas Real Estate Commission. I don't know what will come of those complaints, but at least there's a record now. Monica said she's seen landlords like Gary before, that they operate in small buildings without oversight and get away with boundary violations for years because tenants don't know their rights or are too afraid to fight back. She said what I did by documenting everything and pursuing legal action probably prevented Gary from doing this to future tenants. I hope that's true. My new apartment feels safe. I still have the Nest camera set up and I probably always will, but I'm not checking them obsessively anymore. My therapist says I'm making progress, that the hypervigilance is decreasing, that I'm starting to feel secure again. I'm sleeping better, I'm focusing better at work, I'm starting to feel like myself. The settlement money is sitting in my savings account. I'm using some of it to build an emergency fund so I never feel trapped in a housing situation again. I'm also planning a trip to visit my parents next month. I haven't seen them since all this started and I think some time away will be good. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm still angry about what Gary did, about the violation of my privacy, about the theft, about the months of anxiety and fear. But I'm also proud of myself for fighting back, for documenting everything, for not just accepting it and moving on. A lot of people told me to just break my lease and leave, to not make waves, that it wasn't worth the stress. But it was worth it, not just for the settlement money but because I stood up for myself and established that what he did was wrong. I also learned that tenant rights are real and enforceable, that there are lawyers who will fight for you, that documentation is everything. If anyone reading this is experiencing something similar with a landlord, document everything, install cameras if you can, know your state's landlord-tenant laws, and don't be afraid to get a lawyer involved. I waited too long to take action because I didn't want to cause problems, and in that time Gary continued violating my space. The moment you suspect something is wrong, act on it. I'm doing okay now. My new place is quiet and secure. I'm rebuilding my sense of safety. I'm moving forward.